Hello, I'm Mishka, and this channel is the Helsinki Renaissance, where we will be talking about arts and culture, and hopefully the most Renaissance man-like manner with arts and culture may be discussed, so please stay tuned for that. Now, it appears that I'm just slightly late in addressing this Martin Scorsese versus Marvel movies situation that I didn't initially notice, because even though I feel like I'm rather in the loop about developments in the arts and entertainment sector, whether in the Anglo-American sphere or globally speaking, it's just, I don't know, apparently I was taking a moment off, and whilst I did, this kind of a very neat subject introduced itself as something potentially to be commented on, as Martin Scorsese, who is either the most famous and most well-liked, or the second most famous and second most well-liked director currently working, he came out and either was critical or failed to be enthusiastic about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think that in some ways Scorsese is the perfect person to be not enthusiastic about this kind of what Gus Van Sant called the industrial model of storytelling, because Scorsese has a certain kind of cachet with the audience, and that no one will come out and call Martin Scorsese a player hater or something like that. His credentials as far as having a very, shall we say, unrequited love for cinema is very well established by now. And so it's good that somebody like Scorsese is pointing out that one mega corporation doing high-profile formulaic fodder in a quartal economic framework is not the answer to the needs of our film culture, and it is absolutely right by him to come out and say something halfway critical about Marvel movies. Now, anyway, I just like to talk more from the viewpoint where Martin Scorsese is coming from, because even though I don't dislike the Marvel movies that much, in that I have an earlier video where I go over my opinions and I rank the Marvel movies that I've seen from best to worst. And I was surprised how generally positive I was, because the Marvel movies don't really mean that much to me personally, but I think that there's just enough quality there that, certainly they are better if you compare them to something like Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever or something like that. I mean, Marvel rather rarely, just swings and misses in a kind of a horrible manner, but I feel like there's a certain kind of a qualitative flatness to the Marvel movies that it's difficult for me to get very hyped over the Marvel releases, but there's a certain kind of acceptable consistency to the Marvel franchise that I think it's a bit debatable whether people think that the James Bond franchise has consistency or not, from the Sean Connery through the one George Lazenby to Roger Moore to Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig. Like, it's debatable whether there's consistency or not. I would say that there's more swings and misses in the Bond franchise, but I could also see the kind of viewpoint that if you're into that sort of thing that the Bond movies are, the franchise gives you reason to like the kind of long road of it. And so I think that I would basically compare the qualitative presence of the Marvel movies to the Bond franchise in that obviously some will be classics, others will be the kind of awkward misfires and so on, and it can't all be gold, but it's just a question of do you sort of like the overall package or something. And, I like Bond movies well enough, I like Marvel movies well enough, but I certainly wouldn't say that that's the main line of what I appreciate in cinema. Versus, somebody like Martin Scorsese, he's made some of the greatest movies of all time. He's, a contender for the greatest living director out there, even though I don't particularly like the recent form of the Scorsese movies. I still think that he is worthy of the highest praise as far as contemporary cinema is concerned. So, that's why I am interested in somebody of Scorsese's caliber of introducing these kind of ideas to the mainstream. But anyway, I just want to say for the viewer that I'm not somehow in love with everything that Scorsese has released. I think that he has his share of swings and misses, and I'm not somehow, categorically against Marvel movies just because they're coming from such a corporate culture. But I'm trying to sort of unpack the Scorsese viewpoint, because I saw some people sort of have this very comical attitude towards what Martin Scorsese said. For instance, James Gunn, the director of what I feel like is either the best or the second best individual Marvel movie, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, James Gunn came out and said that he was borderline heartbroken, quote unquote, because he supported Martin Scorsese when he went through some scandals with the Last Temptation of Christ release that was recipient of heavy boycotts by people who either hadn't seen the movie or didn't perhaps properly comprehend the main idea of the Kazantzakis novel or its adaptation. But anyway, James Gunn said that he's a big fan of Scorsese. He supported Scorsese through whatever scandals or career low points where not everyone supported him, but that now Scorsese would quote, judge movies that he hasn't seen and dismiss them and whatever. Like, I mean, obviously that's all nonsense what James Gunn is saying. Like, Scorsese isn't badly reviewing movies that he hasn't seen. He's badly reviewing the culture around production that the Walt Disney Pictures is putting out there, and basically that's where I'm coming from. Because if you're looking at the kind of quotations that Martin Scorsese had in the Empire interview, he said something to the tune of, I've tried with the Marvel movies, I just can't. He said something like, I've seen some of them, I haven't seen all of them. Some of them that I've seen, they aren't my cup of tea. That's not cinema. That's something closer to a theme park ride. Now, obviously, some people take massive issues with Scorsese saying that Marvel movies aren't cinema. And there is this kind of a fairly silly seeming debate about what it is that Scorsese is really after when he's talking about is something cinema and what isn't. I shouldn't speak for Scorsese, so I won't. What I will do is I'll give my viewpoint as to where I think he's coming from with saying that Marvel movies aren't cinema, they're theme park rides or something. I think I already mentioned the Gus Van Sant quotation, where I think it was a documentary serious about, and this feels silly saying it, but I think it was in a couple of documentaries about Ingmar Bergman's VHS collection on his old home at the Faroe Island, where some contemporary filmmakers were asked to talk about things around cinema and things around Ingmar Bergman and so on. Gus Van Sant said in an interview in that documentary, he spoke about this kind of industrial form of storytelling and how it is that some people, such as Gus Van Sant himself, are trying to have this kind of a personal human connection from the artist to the audience outside the industrial model. And I think that Scorsese was after some kind of paradigm like that, where, I think there's an unnecessary elitism to the kind of idea thinking that art house movies or independent movies, as if they would be somehow automatically a higher brand of storytelling than, say, purely corporate storytelling. I don't think an independent release is somehow starting from a higher level than a James Bond movie or an Iron Man movie. I think that both movies need to earn their audiences through whatever means that they go about their business, in that neither one is automatically better or worse than the other. But there's just this question that, I agree with Scorsese where he's coming from because of what happened to Edgar Wright when Ant-Man was in pre-production. So that I don't know the full story, but I think there's something to it, like Edgar Wright was the original writer-director geared to do Ant-Man. The project was rolling forward until there was some situation that Edgar Wright felt like he couldn't execute his vision for the Ant-Man the way that somebody like James Gunn was allowed to execute his vision for Guardians of the Galaxy, and that there was some question about the scenes that were meant to be connective elements with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where Edgar Wright somehow felt like those scenes would have compromised the kind of whatever integrity there was in Ant-Man as a standalone experience, in that Edgar Wright didn't want the kind of situation, again this is just what I gathered, in that Edgar Wright didn't want the kind of situation that his Ant-Man would be treated as if it's just one episode in a TV show-like situation, that the previous episode such and such happened, and tune into the next episode where such and such happened. Like, Edgar Wright didn't want to bring things down to a TV episode level of epicness. What he wanted was this kind of a standalone, giving something special to the viewer. Something like that must have been his view. And he felt like Disney, having the corporate practices that they are having, they compromised being able to deliver a special experience to the viewers. Now, people can agree or disagree, and people can have different views of what special as an experience in cinema is. But the point is that somebody like Edgar Wright felt like the corporate culture that Disney is establishing is somehow limiting artists in what they are able to do too much, that it stops being what people like Martin Scorsese, what people like Gus Van Sant, what people like Edgar Wright, what they think is the whole point of being a filmmaker, that you can give some sort of a specially crafted experience that the whole point is that Martin Scorsese doesn't want to be a carbon copy of James Cameron. Edgar Wright doesn't want to be some sort of a, foreign market equivalent that's exactly like Quentin Tarantino, except playing to different regional audiences or something. Martin Scorsese doesn't want to be just a different shade of James Cameron and whatever, like or Steven Spielberg or whoever director we're meant to compare this to. But like artists want to be, like ambitious artists want to be unique market presences. And I think that what Scorsese is after is that it's extremely difficult to be a unique market presence in the kind of rigorously in that kind of a rigorous corporate framework that something like Disney has for the Marvel movies, where, for instance, the original director for the Captain Marvel movie resigned from the project when she was being informed that effectively Marvel would employ ghost directors who would do a lot of the action and more CGI type stuff, and that the original director was effectively there to be just a jumped up acting coach, just worrying about the kind of drama elements and the character elements. And the original director felt like she was being disrespected, that people didn't think that she would have been good enough to take on all of the roles of a director, in that no one would tell Steven Spielberg that he's only allowed to direct 40% of Saving Private Ryan or something, because Saving Private Ryan, in some parts is Steven Spielberg's attempt at giving some sort of a specifically crafted kind of an experience, in that Saving Private Ryan wouldn't have anywhere near as much of a point as it has if it was exactly like The Longest Day, or if it was exactly like A Bridge Too Far, or something like that, in that if you are a top tier artist, you need to create something unique, otherwise you're not really doing anything with your career. If it's just treading water exercises and formulaic also run movies, that's not what created the kind of passion to take this kind of lifestyle for these people like Edgar Wright or Martin Scorsese. So basically this kind of limiting of the artistic spirit that is happening in the corporate culture is something that, if screenwriters in Hollywood had a greater power or something, they would be constantly complaining that people are changing the screenplay. People don't take the writers' attitudes into consideration. People just use the writers as some kind of idea farms, and they wait for the writers to come up with the kind of acorn version of the movie, and then they just force the writer to sell that acorn to the production company, and then just send the writer off and tell him or her to shut up and play nice and whatever. But certainly screenwriters, if they weren't kept in such a chokehold by the industry, they would complain a lot. They don't complain that much because they're scared that they will be effectively blacklisted if they rock the boat and cause trouble. So screenwriters are kept quiet because of their difficult employment prospects, and directors sometimes complain when they have reached certain kind of a household name level where people like Martin Scorsese aren't worried about whether they'll never work again if they make waves. So directors can speak more freely, but even then it's like how it is that these studios view this kind of situation. They want to keep directors as the kind of freelancers who are just there to come in and deliver on some kind of specific work that fits their brand. So even though directors and artists, they view themselves as people who craft something unique, the studios, in as much as they are hiring anyone, they hire people to stay on brand, so that people think that Martin Scorsese is good at making, expensive, polished-looking dramas or gangster movies or something, and people want Scorsese to stay on brand, or that they want somebody like Edgar Wright, in that they think that he makes, whimsical action-adventure comedy movies. They want Edgar Wright to stay on brand and to just sprinkle some kind of special sauce over a generic product. Studios want these directors to be hired guns and to just slightly improve a generic fare. And so what it is that the corporate side of the film industry wants is antithetical to what it is that these artists want. So corporations want you to do something that's a market equivalent for a hit movie that is within recent memory, and artists want to take the road less traveled and to try to prove their uniqueness and whatever. So these two things are kind of like oil and water, in that it's difficult to be unique whilst being a generic regurgitation of recent hit form. And some people like James Gunn, whose Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, it is tremendously unique, but it feels like it slips into this kind of groove of the kind of hit, popular appeal, action adventure, ensemble, semi-melodrama, in that, it can be done. You can synthesize a thesis and its antithesis, in that something wholly unique, but that also feels like all the other success stories. So an artist and the corporation can both be happy, but it's not very easily managed. And so, I realized that some people are coming after Scorsese, accusing him of some level of elitism, or accusing him of not being with the times. But really, if I take some sort of a comic book here, and if Martin Scorsese, or I don't know who, if Cormac McCarthy came out and said that this isn't real literature, would people, somehow have this kind of exasperated, tone of charging him of elitism, in that in the most literal sense, I suppose this kind of sequential art, it has to be regarded as technically literature. But, if you compare it to some slightly more serious-minded works like this, it's not the wildest charge to say that the experience of this is somehow fundamentally different than the experience of this. And I suppose technically it is elitism of sort, but I don't think that it's bad-natured, malicious elitism, in that I feel like Scorsese has the paradigm of uniqueness in storytelling, and as such he's not interested in just a reiteration of a well-established base pattern. Something so basic cannot possibly appeal to somebody who's seen a lot of things, gone through a lot of things. Like what somebody like Scorsese wants is people who, bring their A game and, have some skin in the game and are part of the same kind of culture zone and are, trying to share this kind of high impact, meaningful experiences. Now, whether you think that something like this is a high impact, meaningful experience or not is debatable, but it's certainly not equally impactful to everyone. And so, I feel like people should respect the fact that, some people just like Marvel movies and they think that that's a great time. And, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but also to respect the idea that some people just think that they are like, in 1980s, some of the Transformers or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or He-Man and the Master of the Universe, they were just flatly called toy commercials. That there was some sort of a 25-minute story that was to bring these characters in the lives of the viewers, and then the viewers would be inclined to buy whatever merchandising was tied in to them. So you can say that that is technically storytelling, or that isn't even storytelling anymore. Like, at what point is something so nakedly just an advertisement that it's, for all intents and purposes, not really creativity in the kind of fine art sense anymore, and it's closer to applied arts. Like, there can be lots of opinions about it, but certainly I feel like anyone who doesn't see that Martin Scorsese is nothing but a good faith actor in this sense, and that he's just trying to remind people what storytelling is meant to be all about, so that Marvel movies right now, they are better than the Batman Forever or Ben Affleck Daredevil or the Jennifer Gardner Elektra type movies, and that yes, the Marvel superhero movies are better than some of those superhero movies of the past, but if Marvel just keeps regurgitating the same base pattern again and again and again, and they aren't giving artistic liberties to the kind of individuals like James Gunn or whoever, like there will be some sort of a time where the audience just has had enough of the same stuff again and again and again. And when you start trying to do the kind of everything needs to be bigger and this influx of mild partial novelty and so on, you just, like, the rest of Hollywood has grown a bit tired and threadbare with this same mentality, in that we've seen all of those movies once too many times, and perhaps kind of like top tier production value superhero movies, they haven't gotten completely exhausted because of the kind of obvious limitations of some of the superhero movies of the past, in that there's still some novelty value in superhero movies right now, but it's just a matter of time till the fatigue sets in, that people will just have seen one too many insert superhero movies, and that you need to start having some kind of deeper level to the whole situation. And then either the corporate culture, either they accept that a more artistically worthwhile material has to be provided, or they stick to the base pattern regurgitations and will just alienate the audience, just flooding the market with too many similar type products. In that, I feel like Scorsese is nothing but right when he is saying that this kind of the culture behind the Disney movies, just there's something there's something about it that I feel like is not building as sustainable a manner that the people at Disney might be, because both Marvel and DC, they have a tremendous amount of iconic characters, and there's decades of interesting story arcs that the Batman or Spider-Man respective mythologies can provide, in that there's any amount of great movies that can be made, but you need to allow top tier artists to do actual storytelling rather than you just give them some sort of a chart. And if anyone has listened to those Kevin Smith sort of stand-up audience situations, I don't know what to call, but like there are some moments where Kevin Smith is talking about his movies in general, sort of interacting with the audiences, and Kevin Smith is talking about this Hollywood producer with a thing about giant spiders. And when Kevin Smith was somehow vaguely involved with a Superman movie, like, he was telling this story about how when Kevin Smith, pitched his version of Superman movie, there was some scene in front of the Fortress of Solitude, and the producer demanded that Kevin Smith put Superman fight some polar bears in front of the Fortress of Solitude. And like Kevin Smith was like, I mean, the place is called Fortress of Solitude. You think that you're allowed to be solitary there. But like the Hollywood culture is such that they think that the audience will lose all interest if you don't have some sort of a jump scare or some sort of an action, whatever, every 5 minutes. And it's just, the creativity is so limited when being forced to conform to such a base pattern that it's not real storytelling anymore. Like that's what Scorsese is trying to say. There can be hundreds of great Batman or Spider-Man movies, but you need to allow artists to go about it the right way. Like Christopher Nolan wasn't forced to keep to the Tim Burton aesthetic or something. Like Christopher Nolan was allowed to go about his Batman movies his way. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work, but it's real storytelling as far as I can see, whereas what somebody like Edgar Wright had to go through with the Ant-Man stuff, like it's not something that I want to see, let's put it that way, in that like some people conceivably like the kind of insistence on consistency that the Marvel movies are doing. And again, I'm not telling anyone that they shouldn't like what they are liking, but from the kind of artist standpoint, when people like Edgar Wright, if they are effectively told that they are there to be Paul Rudd's acting coach, and they are there to add a couple of funny one-liners and pop culture references or whatever. Like, I mean, somebody like Edgar Wright has so much more to offer. Like, to limit his game to such an incidental role in the overall product, it just seems like it's not what I'm in for. As a film fan or something, and clearly wasn't what Edgar Wright felt like he was in it for as a filmmaker and so on. So I feel like that's sort of in there with the kind of Scorsese stance that he's making, and all of the James Gunns who are saying that Scorsese is dismissing movies without watching him, and that like he's some sort of a I don't even know what James Gunn is after with his stuff. Like, I know it just felt so random, like him equating Scorsese not caring to see some adventure movie with the picketers in front of Last Temptation by Scorsese. Like, again, it's just I feel like this is barely even worth talking about, but I just felt like in case somebody doesn't understand the Scorsese viewpoint, I felt like doing this video to making that. And again, I'm not trying to be elitist or anything like that. With my viewpoint, I can enjoy purely popcorn movies and I can enjoy art house movies and whatever, but like you know, I do require a certain level of inspiration and a certain level of that the filmmakers themselves have the highest level of trust in the project. And you know, I personally am not interested in watching somebody go through some treading water exercises that they do for a paycheck. But anyway, perhaps Scorsese feels like there's some of that in today's Hollywood, perhaps he doesn't. But anyway, I just tried to explain this from the kind of standpoint that he might be going for. But perhaps this was it for this video. I thank you everyone for watching. That's all for now. Bye bye.